Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and lots of love and hugs to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing great. I'm very sorry about my voice at the moment. I'm still fighting that nasty cold, but I think I've got to the end, and hopefully by next week my voice should be clear. But I just am so excited that you've joined me for part 4 of our story tonight, because boy, is it a very exciting story. I'm sure you'll agree on that. And now we're going to hear William's account of why he was having these most dreadful nightmares. And I think we're going to find out where this is going to lead. And my guess is it's got something to do with Bigfoot. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 4 of our story.
William, Joyce was on to me. I knew she was. My wife knew unequivocally that I was keeping something from her. She would be at me about this like a dog with a bone, until I invariably told her what was really going on with me. Indeed, in the bathroom this morning, while brushing her teeth, she asked me how my appointment with Dr. Lansford had gone. She looked at me very suspiciously, as if she knew that something was going on. It really threw me for 6 when she asked me if I'd been diagnosed with cancer. Goodness gracious me. I assured her that that was definitely not the case. And I don't know if she entirely believed me on that. But I would never keep something like that from her. I could see my wife looking very distressed. She went on and on about how she couldn't bear it if something terrible were to happen to me, because she couldn't imagine life without me. It was distressing for me to see her so upset. I wanted to tell her the truth, of course I did. But how could I? She'd probably think I needed to be booked into a psychiatric facility immediately if I were to tell her exactly what was on my mind. I guess my wife Joyce knew my going on about my age was not like me. It was a symptom of an underlying bigger problem. As to put it bluntly, until very recently, I've never given a fig about my appearance. But that's probably because I've always thought I looked all right. That was enough for me. I'm a rancher. I don't worry about superficial stuff like that. Suffice to say, when I looked in the mirror this morning, I got an awful fright, seeing my gaunt, ghost-like face staring back at me in the mirror. It rarely knocked the wind out of my sails when I realized I was getting old, as the wrinkled prune of a face, splattered with sunspots, staring back at me in the mirror, did not look remotely good. I'm not afraid to admit that aging does scare me somewhat. I love my life very much indeed, and I enjoy looking after the ranch and my steers, and, of course, feeling the very good wind blowing against my skin. I love the blue sky that we're blessed with in this part of the world, and the fragrant smells of the countryside. I can't imagine losing all my strength and not be able to do what I used to be able to do. I've seen it with my dogs over the years, of which I've had many. Ostensibly, in their youth, they run around with a sprightly, rambunctious energy, and follow me around everywhere. But as those dogs get older, even trotting over to their food bowl can be tough for them, if they have arthritis or aching joints. And I don't want any of that for myself. Joyce does not know that my worry about aging goes far, far deeper than she could possibly imagine. For the last few nights, I have almost involuntarily given the game away, showing her the source of my discord, as I've been having lucid, very graphic nightmares, waking up in quite a sweat, with my pyjamas soaked to the skin. Joyce has been trying to comfort me, reassuring me all the time, telling me I've just had a nightmare. She says in the midst of my sleep, in which I am restlessly tossing and turning, that I shout out, "You're not real! You're not real!" As a consequence, I'm suffering from sleep deprivation, and even my once extremely healthy appetite has been unfortunately flailing me. My weight loss of late has been quite dramatic. I've been trying to give our dog all the food very surreptitiously on my plate under the table at meal times, when Joyce's back is turned. But that shrewd wife of mine, I'm afraid to say, is as sharp as a tack. You can't easily pull the wool over her eyes. I told her that I would eat a hearty breakfast this morning, and this was to allay her fears, convince her that I'd regained my appetite, which is not true, I'm afraid. I was being, shall we say, economical with the truth, to put her flustered mind to rest. Her face brightened at once with that suggestion. She thought I was eager to eat, and hurried into the kitchen to prepare a sizable feast for me. When I came down to the kitchen, I felt nauseously sick. The last thing I wanted to do was eat, and when I smelt all that delicious crispy bacon, I actually wanted to gag. Joyce presented me with an incredible plate of perfectly cooked food that would have been suitable for a king, and on normal occasions I would have been very grateful for this. I'm afraid I sat down flaggingly at the breakfast nook, overwhelmed by the plate piled high with so much food that I felt unwilling to tackle. It felt like climbing a monstrous mountain that I would never get to the top. So I made a pitiful showing of my breakfast. I just was not hungry. And so, with clandestine, cunning fingers, I began to feed the dog under the table, so that Joyce would believe that I had polished the food on my plate, which would give her, I hoped, a large measure of comfort. I told her the breakfast was delicious, and then she said to me, "Don't you think it's very funny, William, that Molly has been piling on the weight of late?" she said, referring to our black Labrador, that could eat an entire refrigerator of food if given the chance. My wife continued rather brazenly, "I've tried to put Molly on a diet, but over the last couple of weeks her waistline seems to be rapidly expanding, and I just can't think why. Her stomach is blown up like a balloon. I just wonder, William, where all the excess calories could be coming from." Joyce gave me such a scathing look. I knew at once that she knew that I'd been feeding Molly my food over the last couple of weeks under the table. If she was expecting a confession from me, she was going to be waiting for a long time, because she wasn't going to get one. But at the very least I did have the good grace to look shamefully bashful, like a dog who's been caught eating up the family sofa, and is desperately trying to feign innocent, and not exactly succeeding in its endeavours. "It is very peculiar, William," my wife continued, making an exaggerated expression of perplexment on her face. "The last time I put Molly on a calorie-reducing diet, she lost a lot of weight, you know. She wasn't remotely happy with me, of course, because she couldn't stand the diet food I gave her, which she's on at the moment. She seems so content these days, for the last couple of weeks or so, to lie around like a very big sack of potatoes, doing absolutely nothing. Have you noticed, William, how round her belly is of late?" "I can't say I have, love. She looks perfectly normal to me." "Oh, she's not normal, William. I can assure you of that. Do you consider it normal to lie down on the floor all day like a big sack of potatoes and not moving an inch, and looking so contented as if you've eaten an entire refrigerator of food? That's what Molly is looking like at the moment. Now, if she hadn't been spayed, I would be very inclined to believe she was about to pop with a litter of over a dozen puppies or so." My wife continued to look at me, as if she expected me to say something. So I mumbled something under my breath about female dogs, the menopause, middle-age spread, as if in some way Molly was afflicted by this unfortunate human condition. "The menopause, is that what you said, William?" My wife chuckled. "Are you being serious? I have heard everything, you know, and that is one I'm not going to forget in a hurry. You think Molly is going through the menopause, do you? Don't be ridiculous, William. Female dogs don't go through the menopause. There is no such thing. But how do you know? I said. I think many animals in middle age naturally get rather porky. I'm sure that's what's happened to Molly here. The weight gain is hardly her fault. It's very interesting you say that, William, my wife said. Because you know what? Molly's weight gain is somebody else's fault. You're right about that. It's definitely not her fault. But I'm trying for the life of me to rack my brains as to who the guilty party can be. What do you mean, love? Well, I think someone's been surreptitiously feeding Molly, don't you? I shrugged my shoulders, avoiding my wife's scrutinizing gaze, and said very casually, I can't think what you mean, love. In my peripheral vision I saw her shaking her head in exasperation. But I know she's worrying about me. She knows exactly where my breakfast ended up this morning, and it wasn't in my stomach. I do wish, of course, that I would regain my appetite, but shock can rarely throw you into an avalanche of confusion and self-doubt. All I can think about is the idiosyncratic creature I encountered. I keep telling myself I'm being completely delusional. What if something unmentionable is going on with my brain? It doesn't bear thinking about, does it? What if I'm going senile or doodle alley? I mean, you hear of batty people all the time being delusional, don't you? Seeing things that aren't actually there. Some of them will see spiders crawling up the walls and strange creatures that don't actually exist in our reality. The truth is, I don't believe I imagined what I saw for a second. But how could I possibly tell Joyce about what happened to me in the early hours of that morning 2 weeks ago? When I think about it, I began to physically shake, like the leaves on a tree in a powerful windstorm. Because that thing, whatever that thing was, well, I know what it was. But it was humongous. There are no words I can find in the English dictionary to describe how huge, how intimidating this thing was. No words. I woke up in what seemed to be the middle of the night, to hear the steers in our field making quite the commotion. I knew something was up, like a mother who is sensitive to the cries of her baby infant. She'll be jolted out of her sleep, wouldn't she, the moment she senses something is wrong? Much like those maternal instincts when it comes to my steers. If anything, and I mean anything, has remotely upset them, I will shoot out of bed with the same kind of emotional tug and conviction that would draw a mother to her baby's cot in a fraction of a second. My wife can sleep through practically anything going on in the ranch. But I've got eyes and ears in the back of my head when it comes to my livestock. If the steers need me, I will absolutely know about it. When it comes to being a rancher, you do what needs to be done, as quickly, effortlessly, and efficiently as you can. In every set of circumstances you might be faced with, that is. I glanced very briefly at my clock on the mantel. It was 2:10 in the morning. I hurriedly dashed over to my closet, throwing a tracksuit over my pyjamas, and I put on a pair of boots, grabbing my rifle as well as my torch, as I hurried downstairs and darted out of the kitchen door as fast as I could. It was a magnificently beautiful night, with an almost full moon hanging proudly in the sky like a dazzling ivory pendant, hosted by an abundance of silvery stars that gleamed like the cheery Christmas baubles on a tree. The moon was magnanimously casting her soft shimmering light over the ranch so that I could see my way reasonably well across the fields, even though the dark silhouettes of the trees were a lot more ambiguously obscure. I trudged over some very muddy patches of ground that had been formed from recent rains we'd been having of late. I bent down under the fence to get to the steers as quickly as I could. The atmosphere in the field did not feel right. I could sense something was up. but I couldn't make any sense of it. I knew my steers were affrighted. By something for sure. They were making enough bleating noises and staying huddled close together in a tight cluster, looking very apprehensive, their eyes fixed on the middle of the field. My first thought that went through my head was, what the hell is the matter with my steers? They are behaving as if a predator is in their midst, like a pack of coyotes or something. With my torchlight I began to flash it across the field. I followed the gaze of my steers. My torchlight landed on one of my steers that was lying on the ground. Something was standing over the steer that was so huge it almost took my breath away. As a rancher, you don't name your steers, but this one I had taken to calling Dartmoor, even though his number was branded on his rear end. I was constantly calling the vet about Dartmoor and reporting on the steer's inability to thrive like the rest of my herd, which was not something that had ever happened to me before. For some reason the steer was not gaining weight, remained weak, feeble, and rather wobbly on his legs, and the vet could find no rhyme or reason for this bizarre, rather incongruous condition of his, as all the tests confirmed that he should be in robust health, just like my other steers were. "We can put him out of his misery for you," he said to me, but I was having none of that. I was hoping that with time my steer would get strong, and if he didn't do well, I guess I'd just keep him on the ranch. My next-door neighbour, Carl, thought I had lost complete leave of my senses. "Since when do ranchers keep feeble livestock?" he asked me. "You're running a business, William, for goodness sake. You can't afford to be sentimental. This is not how this game works. And now you're choosing to call your steer Dartmoor. You should never ever call your livestock names. Everybody knows that. You'll end up getting attached." I knew I wasn't doing things straight by the book, but I didn't care a jot. I just didn't want to give up on Dartmoor. What's wrong with that? But as the weeks rolled by, I was beginning to realize that Dartmoor was very much failing to improve. In this incongruous moment, seeing the bizarre scene unfolding before my very eyes left me feeling too bewildered to be afraid. I couldn't make out what the giant-like human shape was that was squatting over Dartmoor, like a man over his injured dog. I was fumbling with my rifle, wondering should I shoot this thing. What the hell was it? It almost looked human, and then in the illumination of my torchlight, I saw the creature fully. He was holding Dartmoor down, who was against all odds not even struggling to get away from his grasp, but just lying there seemingly calm and unfazed, unlike my other steers in the herd, that were all more than a little disquieted. It was when the creature turned around to look at me that I realized I was staring at a very large male Bigfoot. That was without a question of a doubt, even though I never saw its genitals. I knew this, its energy that it exuded, was so formidably male. You could almost pick up the testosterone in the air. I found myself drawn to looking directly into the creature's eyes. Why I did this I do not know, but I couldn't help myself. I was like the iron filings being drawn to a magnet, and try as I might to look away from this creature's gaze, I could not. There are no words to describe how terrified I was of this Bigfoot. By nature, I'm not given to being a very fearful sort of person. But this Bigfoot was so incredibly powerful, so incredibly intimidating. It was a natural reaction for me to tremble in my boots, which I most certainly did. At that precise moment, I truly believed the Bigfoot was going to kill Dartmoor. Don't they say predators always pick out the weakest animal in the herd for an easy meal? But if that were indeed the case, the Bigfoot was certainly taking his time about it. When you kill something, you usually do it quickly and efficiently and be done with it. Unless, of course, you're slitting the steer's throat and waiting for it to bleed out before it meets its end. Well, that is not what happened. This creature was hovering over Dartmoor like a vet over a sick animal. A little voice in my head was urging me to shoot. "Go on, do it, William, shoot him now," came the voice in my head. "He's a threat to your herd. He needs to be taken out at once." But my fingers slipped like butter on the trigger, and then I heard a voice in my head that said, "No, you don't do that. I'm not going to harm you. I'm here to help the ailing steer, for his life force is impeded by a disabling fear. He doesn't want to thrive. He knows what will become of him if he does. It's not good for him to be so weak. I need to set this right, and to bring him reassurance." I watched incredulously as this powerful Bigfoot, with a mighty hand and fingers easily the size of large pork sausages, nimbly guide a very oversized black stone down Dartmoor's spine. I do not know what he was doing. The other steers were no longer making a racket, but had become significantly quieter, and were observing what was unfolding before them, with more curiosity than fear, as steers can become incredibly inquisitive by nature. The Bigfoot seemed to be talking to Dartmoor, but I do not know what he was saying. The stone he was using reminded me of a hot stone massage I once had on a trip to Thailand, when my wife Joyce persuaded me it would be a good idea to enjoy a little pampering. I do remember the massage therapist placing a long line of very warm stones down my back, and it wasn't altogether unpleasant. Finally, when the Bigfoot was done with the so-called stone therapy, he looked straight up at me and spoke to me telepathically. "I told him that you would not send him for slaughter, so he's agreed to thrive." And with that the Bigfoot just glided away, disappearing into the trees, and was gone. In the days that followed, I was completely convinced that none of this had happened. I was sure I had imagined it all. It must have been a lucid dream. Either that, or I was going completely mad. I told myself it could never have been real. There was no way on God's earth that had actually happened. When my vet paid the herd a visit like he always does, he asked me what had happened to Dartmoor. "He's doing very well. He's putting on weight. He's not wobbling around on that back leg like he used to." I knew the vet was right. The evidence could not be denied. Dartmoor was looking very good, and the weight was slowly creeping on. I thought back to my encounter with the Bigfoot on the field, and knew in my heart that it had happened. But another side of myself was saying, "Don't be ridiculous, William. You were dreaming." Yet how could I explain the transformation in my steer that was nothing short of miraculous? I had been on my ranch for 50 years, and never so much as seen a Bigfoot a day in my life. So what had happened in the early hours of that morning had seemed so surreal. I didn't believe that such things existed, so I was beginning to wonder if I was losing my mind, and whether what I believed had happened had really occurred. How could I possibly tell Joyce about this, or anyone else for that matter? They would think I belonged in a funny farm, and maybe I did. One night after I'd retired to bed, I fell into a deep sleep and engaged myself in a lucid dream. I could see myself out on the field again. It was night. There was a full moon in the sky. I could smell the grass in the field and see all my steers were backed in a corner of the fence. They were making a big commotion as they stared at something in the middle of the field. I followed their gaze, and once again I could see the Bigfoot. He was in the middle of the field, squatting over Dartmoor again, as he had done when I last saw him. Once again, he was gliding a very dark stone down Dartmoor's spine. In my dream, the stone became like a bright light, and the light lit up Dartmoor's entire body, and I could see him physically becoming stronger and growing bigger. I was standing there staring at the Bigfoot in my dream. I could feel the fear I felt for this intimidating creature, even taste it on my tongue. The sweat was pouring down my face as the Bigfoot stood upright on his two powerful, very strapping tree trunk legs, his eyes pinned on me. I was afraid for the safety of my herd. Was the Bigfoot going to kill Dartmoor for an easy meal? I cried out in my dream, "No, no, you can't hurt him. You can't." The Bigfoot seemed to ignore me. I wanted to shoot him and scare him away, but I heard in my head, "No, no, you don't. This isn't a good idea." I stood there trying to press my finger on the trigger as I pointed my rifle at the Bigfoot, but when I fired, nothing happened. The bullets failed to dislodge themselves from my rifle. I watched the Bigfoot put a leather thong around Dartmoor's neck. It had an eagle's feather attached to it. "Don't take it off until the week has passed," his voice instructed, as he looked straight at me with his dark, piercing eyes. "You're not real," I cried out. "You're not real. I'm telling you, you're not real." I woke up to feel a cool cloth being dabbed over my forehead, and Joyce's gentle face peering down at me, with a worried, disquieted look on her face. She was saying, "Calm down, William. It's all right. You've just had a dreadful nightmare, that's all." The dream had felt so lucidly real, so vivid, in fact, so much so that I wondered if all these visions I had been having were real at all. Was I losing it? Should I make an appointment to see Dr. Lansford and admit that I was having lucid dreams and hallucinations? Was this a symptom of a deteriorating brain, I wondered? Please, God, I wasn't going senile, was I? It was later that morning, after my pitiful showing at the breakfast table, where most of the food had ended up in Molly's stomach, that I made my way to the field on the back of my dark brown horse Knight. Joyce's best friend Clara arrived at the house in her green Range Rover. I waved at her, and she responded by waving back and blowing her horn. I was very glad that Clara had come to visit my wife. I was hoping she could reassure Joyce that nothing was going on with me. I knew Joyce would confide in Clara, as she always did, about her concerns for my health and my lack of appetite. Doubtlessly she'd be telling her about the nightmares I'd had over the last few days. Over the years, Clara had become so invaluable as a friend to my wife. They were like sisters and would spend countless hours together in each other's company. They would go out to lunch together, shopping, spend time out of doors painting with oils on canvas. In the beginning, my wife's pictures, well, they weren't terribly good. But these days she had procured some fine works of art. My favourite was a very good picture she'd done of the magnolia tree in spring, when its branches are ablaze with blossom. I had insisted that that picture should be hung pride of place in the hallway, and when people visit, they always are drawn to that painting of hers. I knew the vet was coming over later in the morning to check up on Dartmoor and the other steers, which he did as a matter of routine. It was this morning that I observed, to my astonishment, that Dartmoor was walking without a wobble in his back leg. It seemed as if overnight he had filled out a little, but that was not what had actually confounded me. As I approached the steer, to my amazement I discovered that Dartmoor was wearing a leather thong around his neck, with an eagle's feather attached to it, exactly like my dream the previous night, where I'd observed the Bigfoot placing it around Dartmoor's neck and telling me to leave it for a week or so. I examined the leather thong and the eagle's feather, and it was magnificent. I would have been happy to wear something like that around my own neck. It was pretty macho. What the hell? How on earth did a leather thong get around my steer's neck? How could a Bigfoot have communicated to me through a dream? But if I was losing my mind, Then this physical evidence was rather bewildering, to say the very least. It proved that what had happened to me was indeed real, and maybe I wasn't losing my mind after all, and that revelation brought me much comfort. When the vet arrived on the scene, he was wearing his predictable rubber boots and a warm smile on his face. I will never forget, as long as I live, the flabbergasted look he gave me when he began to examine Dartmoor. "What on earth is this?" he said, pointing to the leather thong around Dartmoor's neck. I couldn't explain that a leather thong had been placed around Dartmoor's neck by a Bigfoot, so I lied and said, "Well, you know the wife, she put it on him." "Did I not tell you, Mr. Chancer? This is why you never, and I repeat never, name your livestock. Look at you, William. Ever since you started calling Dartmoor by his name, you have grown all soppy towards that steer. Your wife Joyce is now making him jewellery, for goodness sake. This is a first, I have to say. I've never known anyone making jewellery for their livestock before. And when I see this, it is very worrying. Don't get me wrong, the jewellery looks very nice. But don't you think it's a tad unwise to encourage your wife to do this kind of thing for the steer? In my opinion, she's growing far too attached to Dartmoor. That's not wise. If she has her way, she will refuse to allow him to be slaughtered. So someone's dinner plate won't be graced with a very good steak on it. I thought you said that I should put him down because of his failure to thrive," I said. "That was then, Mr. Chancer. This is now. For some reason, against all the odds, I'm sure you can see for yourself that Dartmoor is beginning to thrive. And if he keeps on putting weight on at this rate, he might end up being the largest steer in your herd. He's looking very healthy, Mr. Chancer. I've never seen anything like it before. It was a good thing we did not put him down." "Well, I admit he is looking good," I said. "Mr. Chancer, in the circumstances, I think it's a good idea that I tell you a story, so you can reflect on what I am saying, and I hope it'll give you pause for thought. I have a friend, a good friend called Dorothy Kindle. A lovely lady she is too. She lives on a hobby farm not too far away from here. She's one of these people who loves to eat organic all the time. She grows her own vegetables, makes her own delicious preserves, bakes her own bread, and likes to avoid buying stuff at the local store. She decided she'd get some chickens to lay eggs, and some of them she'd invariably turn into roast chicken. She claimed it would be pretty easy to wring their necks, to defeather the birds herself, when it came to cooking the chicken. I mean, how hard can it be? The trouble was, Mr. Chancer, she made the classic mistake. The mistake you've made and the mistake your wife has made. She started to name her chickens. She grew extremely attached to them all. Now she eats their eggs, but there is no way any of her chickens will ever get slaughtered. Why? Because she loves them all. She did the same with her pigs, that she intended to turn into bacon. I warned her, don't you name those pigs like you did the chickens. She had made arrangements to have one of the pigs slaughtered to fill her freezer with bacon so that it would last for months. But in the end, she just couldn't do it. The incorrigible woman called her big fat pig Chubby. And let me tell you, that pig was treated like a Madonna. She kept telling me, "But you don't understand, Dr. Carter. Chubby is so special. She's just like a human being, you know. She makes me laugh all the time. There is no way I can turn her into bacon now. I think I'd just rather personally go to an organic butcher, buy my meat from them." And that's what she did. And why? Because she gets too sentimental about the animals she owns. Even a turkey she was given to feed up for Thanksgiving by a local farmer is now a beloved member of her family. I get where you're going with this, Dr. Carter, and I know you mean well, but you've got me wrong, and you've got my wife wrong. Don't forget I've been a rancher for many years now. I've never had any problems taking my steers off to be slaughtered. And it'll be no different for Dartmoor when the time is right. My wife is not attached to him as you seem to believe. Not attached to Dartmoor. You think your wife is not attached to Dartmoor, Mr. Chancer. I'm sorry, but I beg to disagree with you on that. Don't forget your wife made a piece of jewellery for this steer. Who does that, unless they're attached? That's what people do for their dogs, make beautiful collars for them. Look, whether my wife likes it or not, Dr. Carter, I will be taking Dartmoor to be slaughtered when the time is right, like all my other steers. I give all my steers an excellent quality of life. The end is brutal, I know, but I do have to make a living. I'm very glad to hear it, Mr. Chancer. Very wise words you've spoken. It was later that day. I told my wife what was irking me. I knew now that I was not losing my mind. But how could I tell Joyce about the Bigfoot I'd encountered 2 weeks earlier in a field in the early hours of the morning, doing strange things to Dartmoor, that had now spoken to me in my dreams last night? Would Joyce believe such preposterous claims? In her shoes, I certainly wouldn't. You know, love, you've been wondering why I've not been myself of late, so I'm going to tell you. I know if I don't, I will be subjected to your constant badgering to tell you what is happening with me. So something is going on with you then, William. You admit it. I admit it. But first I will confess that I am guilty for Molly's ever-expanding waistline. Well, I suppose that's a start. I was hoping you were going to confess that the lion's share of your breakfast is going into Molly's stomach. I went to a great deal of trouble this morning to make you an excellent breakfast. You assured me you were hungry. But I saw you give virtually everything on your plate to Molly under the table. That's because you have eyes in the back of your head, love. Nothing ever gets past you, does it? Joyce looked at me through wide eyes. She didn't laugh when I teased her, but became suddenly very solemn, as if she'd been hit with a horrible thought that she did not want to entertain. For a moment she looked extremely alarmed. She threw a hand across her mouth and said, "Oh, please no, William. It's not cancer, is it? I knew it. Why the hell would you keep a thing from me like this? How serious is it? I told Clara that you were in a bad way. She told me it was probably nothing. I knew differently. She said that you had probably lost your appetite and your spring in your step because of the nightmares you've been having of late. But my guess is your nightmares are a symptom of your concerns over your illness. That's why you keep crying out in your sleep. You're not real. You've had a bad diagnosis, haven't you, William? And you don't want to believe it's true. I told her something bigger was going on with you. I'm right. I'm right, aren't I? Oh, please, God, William, how bad is it? Please don't tell me it's terminal. I think I'm going to be violently sick." My wife looked as if she was turning green. A huge tear rolled down her cheeks. "Would you stop garrulously going on and on, love? Goodness gracious me. I told you, did I not, that I don't have cancer? Would I lie to you about something like that?" "I don't know, William. Would you? That's the $100 question. Would you? I'm not an idiot, you know. I can see what's going on. You've not been yourself for the last couple of weeks. At least you've admitted this morning that most of your breakfast ended up in Molly's stomach, when you swore to me you were ravenously hungry. You lied to me, William. How can I trust anything you say? Why are you pushing me away like this? I don't understand. We always support each other, do we not? And you swore when we got married there would never be any secrets between us." "I'm not pushing you away, Joyce. That's the last thing I'm doing. I would never do that. I've just been going through some rather strange stuff of late. It's true that I don't like the way I look at the moment in the mirror. I've become aware of the fact that I'm getting older, but that has not been the real source of my angst. I have been worried, love, that I've been losing my mind. I was concerned I might be going senile. That's why I've lost my appetite and become very withdrawn. I've been so worried about my mental health."
"You think you're going senile?" laughed Joyce, rolling her eyes in the back of her head in exasperation. "Where did you get that absurd, idiosyncratic idea from you? You're definitely not going senile, William Chancellor. I can assure you of that. I would know about things like that. You've got a memory on you like an elephant. You talk about me being as sharp as a hawk, but look at you. You're the first to notice if anything is going on with your steers. You noticed Dartmoor's declining health before Dr. Carter even did."
I took my wife by the hand and said, "I want to show you exactly what's going on with Dartmoor. It's funny you should mention that steer, because what I have to tell you has a whole lot to do with him." Joyce withdrew her hand from me. "What has Dartmoor got to do with you going senile?" she asked suspiciously. "He is all right, isn't he? I thought you told me he was beginning to thrive." "He is, love. But I need to show you something else. I want to take you over to the steers, and I'd like you to take a long, hard look at Dartmoor. Tell me if you notice anything rather unusual about him." I led my wife by the hand to the field of steers. There was an expression of confoundment developing on her face. Maybe she was beginning to clandestinely wonder if I was going senile after all. My steers are used to my presence. When they see me around, they never bat so much as an eyelid, because when you're around your steers all the time, they regard you as part of the herd. But when my wife approaches them, along with Molly, who hangs around my wife all the time, as if she's joined at the hip, then they notice us.
"Goodness gracious me, William! Look at Dartmoor," said my wife as we approached the steer, who incongruously trotted over to us like a horse to its rider, almost as if he knew we'd been talking about him. I'd never known the steer to be so friendly before. He was behaving like a dog, not like the rest of the herd. And Molly, who was wagging her tail, was circling around Dartmoor, almost as if she expected him to play with her, and it seemed that Dartmoor was interacting with Molly. "What on earth?" said my wife, looking in astonishment at the leather necklace and the eagle's feather tied around Dartmoor's neck. "Why did you put a necklace on Dartmoor's neck?" my wife asked me, looking perplexed. "Where did you get such a lovely piece of jewellery from? And why would you put it on the steer? Oh, my goodness, you're not getting too attached to him, are you?" she asked, looking disquieted. "For goodness sake, William, you're a rancher. You can't afford to get attached to the livestock. You should never have named him, you know. When Dr. Carter suggested you put him down because he was so feeble, you point-blank refused, did you not? You insisted Dr. Carter gave the steer a chance. I told Clara all about it. She says ranchers never behave like this. And now you've only gone and got soppy over the steer. I can't believe this is happening to you. So this is why you're not eating. You've formed an attachment to Dartmoor, and you can't bear the thought of him getting slaughtered. Is this what this is about? My goodness, William, we're running a business, for goodness sake, not an animal sanctuary. What has got into you? Joyce, you're doing it again. You're babbling on, without giving me a chance to speak. What I'm trying to tell you is that I didn't put the necklace around Dartmoor's neck. It was not me." "You didn't? Well, then who did?" My wife's eyes grew wide. "It's Dr. Carter, isn't it? He's the one doing this. Oh, my goodness. He put the necklace on Dartmoor as some kind of wacko New Age medicine. Is that what you're going to tell me? Is it Dr. Carter that's going senile? Why, Joyce, do you always jump one step ahead of me without giving me a chance to explain anything? No, Dr. Carter is not going senile, nor am I, and he doesn't practice some wacko New Age medicine for your information."
Well, that is a relief. But if it wasn't you and it wasn't Dr. Carter, then who did put the necklace on Dartmoor? A Bigfoot did this. A strapping male Bigfoot. 2 weeks ago, Joyce, while you were fast asleep in bed, I heard a commotion going on in this field. I went to investigate, and a Bigfoot was in the field standing over Dartmoor. I thought he intended to eat the steer. I was terrified, Joyce, you have no idea. The thing was enormous. My wife looked at me as if I was going insane. That was why I had never shared the story with her in the first place. Sorry, say that again, William. It was a Bigfoot that put the necklace on Dartmoor. My wife's face paled. Is this a joke, William? Because if it is, I just don't find it remotely funny. I'm sorry, but I don't. I might have a good sense of humour, but this is stretching things for me. This is not a joke, love. A Bigfoot? But are those things even real? They are real, Joyce. I know because I've seen one. I proceeded to tell my wife what had happened. In the beginning of my story, she looked deeply cynical, as if she didn't believe a single word of it. But when I got to the part about the Bigfoot with the black stone that he used on the back of Dartmoor's spine, her expression significantly changed. You say the Bigfoot was using a black stone over Dartmoor's back? He sure was. Joyce began to chuckle. A light seemed to come on in her eyes. Oh, everything fits so perfectly. I now know who the mysterious angel was that broke into Clara's house and literally bulldozed their front door down. My wife proceeded to tell me Clara's extraordinary story. We began to connect the dots, and I realized there must be a Bigfoot living on our property who had extrasensory abilities. He had driven the evil out of Clara's house and brought a steer that was failing to thrive back to perfect health. If you think that is the end of my story, you would be wrong, although we're getting there, of course. I was determined to show my wife that I was not remotely sentimental about Dartmoor, although I hasten to say I actually was. Dr. Carter was right. You don't go naming your livestock. It's just not a good thing to do. But in my humble opinion, Dartmoor was very different to my other steers. He was behaving more like a dog than a steer. When it came to the day the steers would finally be taken off for slaughter, it was not an easy day for me, but then again it never is. I would say goodbye to my steers and thank them for giving their lives up to feed other people. It was important for me to always do that. Lo and behold, when I went into the field to count all my steers, Dartmoor was nowhere to be found. We searched high and low for him, but he was gone. By the next morning there he was in the field, all on his own, having escaped the slaughter, and there in the mud was a big footprint that could only have belonged to the Bigfoot. In the end it was decided that Dartmoor would never ever be slaughtered, because it just was not meant to be. And he did become a much-loved member of our family, who seemed to think he was a dog rather than a steer. So I learnt one thing. Don't you ever go naming your livestock. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.